The first bell wasn't supposed to echo across Paris, but when it did, every head in the square snapped toward us. For a moment, the world went silent, right before 100 hidden musicians prepared to rewrite Christmas history. No one knew what was coming, not even the guards standing just meters away. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the Parisian air, shimmering beneath the golden lights of Hotel de Ville. It was the kind of winter evening where every breath carried the scent of roasted chestnuts and distant laughter. Tourists huddled under scarves. Locals hurried across the square, hands wrapped around steaming cups of chocolate chaude. Everything seemed ordinary. Until we arrived. Or rather, until we hid in plain sight. A violinist pretended to tune her strings near the steps. A cellist leaned against a fountain like he was just resting. 3 brass players posed as street performers who'd lost their way. A children's choir wandered among the crowd with innocent smiles, blending seamlessly with the holiday shoppers. And I stood right in the middle of the plaza, disguised as a tourist with a camera dangling around my neck, trying not to shake from nerves. It had taken months of planning. 100 musicians. 9 hidden conductors. A cue system built around simple holiday bells. And a song that could electrify any soul, Carol of the Bells. The challenge? Pulling off the biggest flash mob Paris had ever seen, without getting shut down before the first note. Across the square, our lead conductor, a middle-aged man with a warm smile and a Santa-red scarf, pretended to buy roasted almonds from a vendor. He wasn't eating. He was waiting. Watching. Measuring the mood of the town square like a surgeon gauging a heartbeat. The moment felt perfect. But perfect moments always arrive with tension. Because Paris police were patrolling the area, weaving slowly in and out of the crowd. A rogue violin. A misplaced trumpet. One wrong move, and the most ambitious performance of the year would be over before it began. I kept my head low as they passed. One officer paused, scanning the crowd. His eyes lingered on me for a second too long. I swallowed hard. Not now, please not now. Finally, he walked away. My earpiece crackled softly. Everyone ready? Our conductor whispered. My hand tightened around the tiny silver bell tucked inside my coat. That bell was my job, my entire purpose tonight. The bell wasn't just symbolic, it was the ignition switch. One ring, and the entire square would explode into music. But there was one rule. Do not ring it early. Do not ring it late. Do not ring it unless you want 100 musicians to erupt on command. The air buzzed with anticipation, even though no one around me knew why. Tourists posed for selfies. Couples held hands. A little boy dragged a sled through slushy cobblestones. The conductor reached into his pocket. My heart punched a hole through my chest. Here it comes. He raised his own bell, subtle, almost invisible. My fingers trembled. And then, a gust of winter wind swept through the square, scattering snow like glitter. The giant Christmas tree beside the carousel flickered as the wind rattled its ornaments. Something about that moment, something about the silence and the shimmer and the softness of the winter air, felt like the entire world was inhaling together. Waiting. Brace yourself. The conductor gave the slightest nod. Ding. The first bell echoed gently, almost fragile, like a whisper brushing across the square. Heads turned. The violinist near the steps froze mid-tuning. The street performer brass trio stopped pretending to argue. The children's choir exchanged excited glances. And me? I felt the shockwave ripple all the way through my chest. Time thickened. The lights blurred. Conversation sputtered beneath the echo of that delicate note. People looked around, eyebrows raised. Was that part of something? Did you hear that? What's happening? But there was no answer yet, just the ghost of that first bell, trembling through the cold air like a promise. Seconds stretched. 5, 4, 3. The conductor lifted his hand. Everything inside me surged. Then, 12 more bells rang out in perfect, terrifying harmony. The crowd gasped. People spun in circles, trying to locate the sound. A child pointed. A woman dropped her shopping bag. A street vendor whispered, "Mon Dieu," because nothing like this had ever happened in the middle of Paris. The bells overlapped, weaving into the haunting, iconic rhythm of Carol of the Bells, soft, ominous, thunderous all at once. But the musicians still hadn't revealed themselves. Not yet. That came next. I swallowed, feeling my pulse hammer as my part approached. The conductor swept his arm downward like a magician revealing a secret. And from every corner of the square, strings began to play. Hidden violinists. Cello players stepping out from behind statues. Musicians rising from benches like shadows sharpening into shape. The gasp from the crowd rolled across the plaza like a tidal wave. And this was just the beginning. The first bow struck a note so sharp and pure it froze every breath in the square. Then the second wave of musicians rose, silent shadows transforming into a storm. If the bells startled Paris, the strings were about to ignite it. The violins surged first. A sound like shimmering crystal sliced through the chilly Paris air, delicate yet fierce, commanding attention with the precision of 1,000 snowflakes striking stone in unison. The haunting rhythm of Carol of the Bells grew stronger, layer over layer, musician after musician stepping into the open. People stood absolutely still. Even the wind paused, as if afraid to interrupt. Near the fountain, 3 violists lifted their bows together, their synchronized movements so perfect it looked rehearsed 1,000 times, which, in truth, it nearly had been. A mother holding her daughter close whispered, "They came out of nowhere," while the child stared wide-eyed, clutching a teddy bear with both hands. But this was only the second wave. Across the square, the brass players, previously disguised as lost street performers, straightened their coats and raised their instruments. The trumpets gleamed under the winter lights, polished so brightly that the Christmas bulbs reflected off them like tiny golden stars. The first trumpet call broke through the harmony like a clarion. Ba-da-da-dam. Bold. Bright. Electrifying. Tourists gasped. A group of Italian visitors dropped their selfie sticks. 2 teenagers screamed in excitement and started recording. Meanwhile, our conductor, now clearly revealed, stepped forward from the almond vendor, no longer pretending, no longer hiding. His red scarf whipped in the wind as he lifted his baton with the slow, dramatic grace of a king about to command an army. 100 sets of eyes locked onto him. Every string. Every brass. Every choir member. Every hidden musician ready to burst forth. I felt the hairs on my arms stand up. Because the third wave was mine. The drums. The heartbeat of the entire flash mob. I had been standing in the center of the square holding my camera like any ordinary tourist, but beneath my coat was a pair of compact drumsticks and a tiny portable snare strapped tight against my body. When the conductor pointed toward the center, toward me, I felt the blood drain from my face. This was it. I stepped forward. A murmur rippled through the crowd as I pulled my coat open and revealed the small drums strapped to my torso. A woman nearby gasped. A man clapped his hands together in astonishment. I struck the first beat. Tum-ta-ta. 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 The rhythm locked perfectly with the bells and strings, like gears snapping into motion. And that rhythm, oh, that rhythm, it spread through the plaza like a fire racing up dry wood. The choir joined next. They came from every direction, children, teenagers, adults, all wearing scarves of different colors but sharing the same bright, glowing smiles. They formed a semicircle near the carousel, each voice rising in angelic harmony. Their first notes soared above the instruments. Hark how the bells! People clapped hands over their mouths. Some cried. Some simply stood, transfixed. The carousel lights spun slowly behind them, turning the scene into a living postcard. 100 musicians performing one of the most dramatic Christmas compositions ever written, all under a sky dusted with snow. And then the fourth wave arrived. The cellists. Massive instruments strapped to their backs like warriors carrying shields, stepping confidently through the crowd. A couple moved aside to let them pass, staring in disbelief as the musicians formed a circle and planted their instruments like ancient trees taking root. The cellos dropped into the mix with deep, thunderous resonance. Dum, 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 dum. You could feel it in your chest, like someone knocking on your ribs from the inside. A sensation so heavy, so immersive, that even the police officers patrolling nearby stopped walking and just watched. One of them whispered something in French. Another smiled. But then, the unexpected happened. Near the northern end of the square, a group of musicians weren't moving. They were supposed to step into formation during this part of the piece, but they stood frozen, staring at a security guard who had just approached them. My heart dropped. From where I stood pounding the snare, I could see the guard waving his hands, speaking quickly. He wasn't angry, more confused, but confusion could still ruin everything. Our conductor noticed immediately. His baton hesitated mid-air. The musicians in that sector exchanged anxious glances. They were holding clarinets and flutes, crucial for the next section. If they didn't join in time, the entire arrangement could collapse. And time was running out. The choir reached the crescendo. The strings raced faster. The brass prepared for their next explosive entrance. But those flutists, 5 of them, still hadn't moved. The security guard was blocking their path. I kept playing, but my mind raced. Should I move? Should someone else? Should we leave them? No. Not in a flash mob of 100. Not with this much heart. Not with a crowd this enchanted. Our conductor made a split-second decision. He lowered his left hand below his hip, our secret signal. Across the square, 2 backup flutists disguised as tourists threw off their scarves, grabbed their hidden instruments, and sprinted into position. Just in time. They lifted their flutes to their lips. Asterisk, and the next verse ignited. The crowd roared. The security guard stepped back, startled, as the music washed over him like a tidal wave. But behind him, the blocked flutists still looked terrified. Someone, was approaching fast. And it wasn't part of our plan. The crowd thought the flash mob was at full power, but they had no idea a storm was about to break loose. As the music soared, a single figure pushed through the audience, and every musician saw how we planned for everything, except this. The flutes pierced the air in bright, icy harmonies, weaving like shimmering strands across the square. The drums thundered beneath them. The violins danced above them. The choir's voices, softening, swelling, rising, wrapped around the plaza like a warm blanket in the winter cold. From the outside, it looked perfect. From the inside, we felt the tremor. Because the blocked flutists weren't scared of a guard anymore. They were scared of the man behind him. He pushed through the crowd with a sharpness that cut through the softness of the music, a tall, heavy-set figure in a dark coat, moving with purpose. Not angry. Not shouting. Just focused. Too focused. His eyes were locked on the musicians like he was searching for someone. Or something. A ripple of unease traveled through our formation. I kept drumming, steady, powerful, part of the heartbeat driving the entire performance. But my eyes were fixed on him. The backup flutists were doing brilliantly, their sound blending so seamlessly that most of the audience never knew anything had gone wrong. The conductor gave them an approving glance before returning to the rest of the orchestra. But that man. He wasn't watching the show like everyone else. He was hunting. The choir's next phrase soared. Merry, 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 merry Christmas. The sound echoed off the buildings, bouncing like chimes of light between the stone walls of Hotel de Ville. The brass players lifted their horns. The strings arched dramatically. People in the crowd cheered. Phones flew into the air. A group of kids danced near the steps. But the tension under the music tightened like a wire pulling from both ends. The strange man stepped closer to the musicians, slipping between stunned spectators who didn't notice the disruption. He was near the blocked players now, so close I could see their faces tighten in panic. Our conductor flicked his baton. Our cue. We shifted into the next section, fast, fiery, explosive. The cello section plunged into deep bow strokes, their sound darkening like thunder rolling across the square. The trumpets blasted a sharp accent. The choir rose again, voices pushing the momentum upward. Every note was electric. Every second felt like we were balancing on a blade. Because the man was now only a breath away from the clarinetist at the edge of the formation. She tried to back up. She hit the fountain. There was nowhere else to go. What was he doing? Was he trying to stop us? Was this some kind of complaint? A disruption? A misunderstanding exploding at the worst possible moment? Before I could process it, the man reached into his coat. My heart stuttered. The clarinetist froze. A violinist stepped forward protectively. The conductor's eyes widened. And then, the man pulled out a baton. Not a weapon. Not a threat. But a conductor's baton. He held it up, trembling, his eyes glistening. "Please," he whispered in French, voice lost beneath the music. "Let me join." Everything inside me lurched. He wasn't trying to stop the flash mob. He was trying to be part of it. The clarinetist blinked. The flutist exchanged looks. The conductor hesitated, arms suspended midair. The crowd, blissfully unaware, continued cheering, recording, living inside the magic of the performance. But the musicians understood. We felt the weight of the moment. The man stepped forward, tears running down his cheeks. "My wife," he said shakily, pointing at the baton. She was supposed to be here. Carol of the Bells, it was her favorite. She passed last winter. I didn't know you would play it today. I just wanted to feel close to her again." The clarinetist lowered her instrument. The blocked flutist softened. My throat tightened. And our conductor, stern, proud, disciplined, broke character for the first time that night. He lowered his own baton, walked toward the trembling man, and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. The orchestra never missed a beat. The choir kept singing. The strings kept weaving. The drums, my drums, held the rhythm that held the world together. But the emotional center of the square shifted. Our conductor leaned in and whispered something to the man. The man nodded, sobbing quietly. Then, our conductor stepped aside, handing the stranger the lead position. A collective gasp moved through the musicians. He wasn't just letting him join, he was letting him conduct the next section. The man stepped forward, barely able to stand. He raised his baton to the sky, hesitant, trembling, reverent. He inhaled. This was the moment his entire heart had been dragged toward. The audience had no idea what was happening. But we did. We braced. We waited. We watched his baton drop. And the orchestra exploded into the next crescendo, following a stranger who had just stepped from grief into greatness. The music soared higher than anything we'd rehearsed, charged with raw emotion, trembling energy, and the unstoppable force of a man conducting in memory of the one he loved. But as the crowd roared, something else stirred at the opposite end of the square. A figure climbed onto the carousel roof and looked directly at us. This person was definitely not part of the performance. The man on the carousel roof didn't blink. He was watching us with a stillness that didn't belong in a celebration. 100 musicians were pouring their souls into the crescendo, and yet every one of us felt that shadow overhead. For the first time all night, the music wasn't the only thing commanding the square. The orchestra surged beneath the stranger-turned conductor, each note swelling with the force of memories, love, and loss. His baton guided us through the storm of sound with shaky grace, at times uncertain, at times brilliant, always unbearably human. The crowd was mesmerized, unaware of the silent tension rippling inside our formation. Because on top of the carousel, silhouetted against twinkling Christmas lights, stood another figure. A thin man. All black clothing. Hat pulled low. Hands tucked into his coat. Just staring. Not excited. Not recording. Not even reacting to the music. Just watching. I kept drumming, each beat pulsing through the square like a rallying heartbeat, steady, grounding, powerful. People danced. Shoppers gathered. Children pointed at the choir with wide-eyed wonder. The entire plaza felt alive. But that figure. He disrupted the air just by standing still. Our conductor, well, the man who had temporarily taken over, didn't notice. His eyes were locked on the orchestra, pouring everything he had into keeping time. The musicians followed him with soft smiles and tear-glossed focus. But the real conductor saw. His gaze flicked upward, sharp and instinctive. He lowered his head slightly, signaling us in the most subtle way, stay alert. But we had to keep playing. Because the show wasn't stopping for anything. The strings rushed through their next run, sharp, icy bursts of melody slicing through the air. The brass layered in with explosive clarity. The flutes sparkled above everything like frost glittering under moonlight. And then came the choir, soft, angelic, rising like smoke from a winter chimney. The stranger on the carousel didn't move. Not even to shift his weight. My eyes locked onto him between drum strikes. The rhythm pulsed through my palms, but my heartbeat was louder. He was waiting for something. Or someone. Suddenly he stepped forward. A gasp caught in my throat. He approached the edge of the carousel roof like he was preparing to jump, not away, but down into the crowd. No. No, not now. Not in the middle of the biggest flash mob in Paris. But right before he could descend, the carousel turned just enough for a beam to block him from my view. I lost sight of him as it rotated. I scanned frantically between beats. Still gone. The conductor continued guiding us into the hardest part of the piece. The rapid-fire string tremolos, the pounding rhythm, the soaring vocal cascade that turned the entire square into a cathedral of sound. The stranger's baton shook, but he kept going. Every musician behind him played like their hearts were held in their hands. But my eyes kept flicking toward the carousel. Where was he? Where? There. He reappeared on the opposite side of the roof, walking along its curved edge with unsettling calm. The real conductor's jaw tightened. He subtly angled his baton, telling the brass to hold steady. Telling me to stay locked in. Telling everyone. We finished this no matter what. The music rose higher and higher, swirling through the winter air like a blizzard of sound. The lights reflected off instruments. Snow drifted more heavily. The crowd pressed closer, drawn by the sheer electricity pouring from 100 musicians. The man on the roof suddenly crouched. My breath caught. Was he preparing to jump? To disrupt the show? To land on the carousel horses below? Then he pounced. But not off the roof. He leapt onto a metal service ladder tucked behind the carousel signage, swift, precise, practiced. He wasn't some random troublemaker. He knew exactly where the ladder was. He climbed down. Fast. Too fast. My heart slammed inside my chest. He hit the ground behind the carousel and vanished from view. I swallowed hard, forcing my hands to stay steady on the drum. The rhythm couldn't falter, not now, not ever. The choir's voices soared above us. Ding-dong, ding-dong. Their harmonies rippled like wind chimes. But inside, I felt a storm rising. The real conductor subtly moved around the front of the orchestra, placing himself at an angle where he could see behind the carousel. His face tightened with every second. Then a blur. The man emerged from behind the carousel, weaving between dancing spectators, his head ducked low, cutting through the crowd like a shadow carving through light. He was moving toward the musicians. Toward the center. Toward me. The drumbeat became thunder. Not just from the music, but from my pulse. He approached quickly, slipping between people who were too entranced to notice him. His coat brushed past the cellist's case. His shoulder bumped a tourist who barely reacted. The orchestra launched into the peak crescendo. A tidal wave of sound that shook the very air. Strings flying. Brass blazing. Choir crying out. Drums pounding like war. And the carousel stranger stepped right into our formation. I froze mid-beat. He looked up at me. And smiled. A calm, unsettling smile. Then he reached into his coat. Not fast. Not threatening. Just deliberate. Slow enough that only the musicians could see. Slow enough that the audience didn't notice the shift in tension. The real conductor's eyes widened. The stranger's hand emerged holding A folded sheet of music. Weathered. Torn. Marked with handwritten notes. He held it toward me like an offering. Like a message. Like a warning. I didn't know which. But before he could speak, he dropped the sheet. And it wasn't just music. It was a letter. One addressed to our Flashmob conductor. His letter hit the ground like a silent bomb. No sound, yet every musician felt the explosion. 100 instruments were still blazing through the finale, but all I could hear was my heartbeat. Whatever was written in that folded sheet, it wasn't meant for the crowd. It was meant for us. The final surge of Carol of the Bells thundered through the Paris square, vibrating through stone, snow, and soul. Instruments shined. Voices burned. Tourists screamed in awe. Children danced wildly in circles. But inside our formation? Stillness. Every musician stole glances at the letter resting by my drum, crisp against the ground, trembling from the vibrations of the music. The stranger who delivered it stood motionless, head lowered, breath fogging in the cold air. He wasn't smiling anymore. He wasn't threatening. He was waiting. For what? My hands kept moving automatically, muscle memory guiding each strike of the drum. Tum-ta-ta. 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 But my mind was spinning. The stranger's eyes flicked toward the real conductor. Then back to me. Then to the letter. It wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Our real conductor maintained his composure, chin up, shoulders relaxed, baton steady, but his eyes flickered, sharp as lightning. He saw the letter. He saw the man. He knew something we didn't. The music entered its most explosive moment. Strings racing like wind over ice. Brass roaring like winter storms. Choir lifting into pure celestial light. And the stranger stepped back. Not fleeing. Not hiding. Just retreating into the crowd like smoke dissolving into air. His job was done. The real conductor moved subtly toward me, guiding the performance with one hand while inching closer through the sea of bows and breath and instruments. I kept drumming, but the letter felt like a living thing pulsing at my feet. Finally, at the exact moment the choir hit their final soaring note. He reached it. His shoe pressed gently on the edge of the folded paper. He didn't pick it up. He didn't open it. He simply covered it, anchoring it in place, claiming it without drawing attention. The entire orchestra crashed into the last line. On this Christmas Day. Boom. The final chord rang out like the bells of Notre Dame hammering the night sky. The people of Paris erupted. Cheers exploded. Applause thundered. Phones rose like a forest of screens capturing forever what they had just witnessed. Snow drifted down in slow, enchanted spirals. Children squealed. Couples hugged. Tourists shouted, "INCRY Billy!" And 100 musicians, exhausted, shaking, hearts pounding, lowered their instruments. We shared the kind of smiles born only from adrenaline and magic. But the conductor didn't smile. He finally bent down and lifted the letter with trembling fingers. For the first time all night, he looked afraid. He held it tightly, like it might blow away, or explode, or vanish. The man who had conducted in memory of his wife walked over, still holding his borrowed baton. He opened his mouth to say something, but when he saw the expression on our real conductor's face, the words melted away. The music stranger, the one who had delivered the letter, was nowhere to be seen. Gone. Evaporated into the crowd. The conductor glanced around, scanning faces, checking shadows. Then he turned to me. "Stay close," he whispered. The crowd was still cheering, chanting, asking for encores, yelling, "Bravo!" But under the noise, I heard something else in his voice. Urgency. Fear. Recognition. He slipped the envelope into his coat and pressed a hand over it like he was sealing it with his heartbeat. The orchestra began to gather around, forming a protective circle without even realizing why. Instrument cases clicked open. People hugged. Musicians congratulated one another. The choir wiped away happy tears. But none of us could ignore him. The conductor stood still in the center of our circle, fingers clamped around the letter, his breath clouding visibly in the winter air. Finally, slowly, he opened it. The paper crackled. Every musician leaned closer. My chest tightened. Inside was a single sheet of aged music. Not just any music. Our music. A version of Carol of the Bells marked with handwritten notes, alterations, warnings, directions. But it wasn't the music that stole our breath. It was the message scribbled across the top. 4 words. Jagged handwriting. Almost desperate. He knows your secret. The conductor's face drained of color. He flipped the page. There was more. A second line. Stop the next performance. The choir fell silent. The string section looked at each other in horror. Someone whispered, "What does that mean?" But the conductor wasn't finished reading. His hands shook harder with every second. A final line. Written darker, heavier, like the writer pressed the pen into the page with fear. "If you don't, people will get hurt." The square felt suddenly colder. The musicians stood frozen, instruments at their sides, breaths hanging in the air like unanswered questions. The conductor looked up at me. At us. At the 100 people who trusted him. And in a voice barely louder than a whisper he said, "We're not done." He folded the letter. Tucked it close. Straightened his coat. "We have to find him." "Who?" someone asked. His eyes hardened. "The man who sent this." He scanned the edges of the square, searching the dark corners where the stranger might be hiding. "Before he finds us." A gust of wind cut through the plaza, scattering snow and echoing through the emptying streets of Paris. Somewhere out there, a shadow was waiting. And the next flash mob might be a trap.